We are now recording this panel.
Okay. Welcome to Assiti Shards. I'm going to start down at the far end and ask the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us what you write.
Hi everybody, I'm Kevin Ikenberry. I write primarily military science fiction, but I wrote the Assiti Shards novel, The Crossing, featuring the American Revolution.
And I'm Sarah Hayes, and I write short stories in the 1632 universe, and I read the Assiti Shards stories too.
I'm Bjorn Hasseler. I edit 1632 and beyond and write stories.
I'm Bethanne Kim. I'm on 1632 and beyond and writing stories. I have a short story I'm working on for Time Spike, but mostly I'm here because I can text Garrett if there's sound with audio and try and make sure that he's plugged in. Garrett?
Hey, I'm Garrett W. Vance. I write Time Spike and 1632 stories. And lots of other fun things.
All right. How many of you here have read at least something in 1632? Okay. How many of you have
Yay.
That's
read-
everyone.
Yep. How many of you have read something in Time Spike? Okay. Alexander Inheritance,
Well, that's cartoon.
The Crossing, okay, and An Angel Named Peterbilt.
Yes.
Okay.
Other than, I'm just adding this for the people who can't see, other than Alexander Inheritance, I believe, they were all about a third of the people here have read them, and Alexander Inheritance, it was most of the people.
Okay, so these are the 5 Assiti shards that transported human beings back to the past. We do know from various forwards and stuff that there were other Assiti shards that occasionally moved something from an ancient period forward, and these just went down as the occasional sea monster sighting, and nothing really ever came of them. So, Garrett, can you? I'm going to assume for the moment that we all know about the Ring of Fire taking people into 1632 Germany. Garrett, can you lay the groundwork for us for Time Spike?
Right. Okay, well, the Time Spike was another Assiti Shard event, and it was not clean the way that the Grantville event was. Grantville was a perfect circle. The Time Spike was messy, and it sent a lot of different time periods kind of just here and there all over what we would call modern day Illinois. So you have from the dawn of time to the current day, periods of time all mixed together in kind of a patchwork. So you have a lot of different people that came through. The Cahokia people, and they're the Pre-Mounds tribesmen, Cherokees from the Trail of Tears, Spanish conquistadors, and then modern day people from the prison. So it's quite an interesting place. It's a lot going on in Time Spike.
All right.
Mix of cultures and animals and plant species from all of those different periods as well.
Right, and that event they refer to as the Quiver, correct?
Right, that's right. Or the Great Wind is what the Native Americans were calling it.
Okay, and the original Time Spike novel by Eric Flint and Marilyn Kosmetka centers on prison, but can you tell us a little bit about the groups you've written about?
Well, okay, I decided to go a different direction because at that time, the Time Spike, the prison and everything was Eric's territory. So what I did was focused on a very small group of people, one conquistador who is repentant, reformed, Gonzalo, and then Nathan Tucker, who was a scout in the cavalry with the Trail of Tears soldiers. And he was from Texas, actually, but he joined the American Army, as people often did back then. Then they meet up with some pre-mountains people, some tribes people, and they end up in Cahokia, which is they call it the city of the pyramids, and that's the big mounds that they built, and have some adventures there. And then they go on to discover a new area that's quite interesting. It's I call it the Mysterious Mesa. Basically, it's about 1,000 foot high, roughly crescent moon shaped area that sits, it's like a mesa flat above what was a drained sea. For a short period of time there was an ocean around it, and then that all drained down into the main ocean of that area, which now runs down the middle of the continent. So they go to explore that and find that it has basically a Pleistocene ecology going on, and they realize that it's a pretty safe place to move to. So they begin taking in. There were a lot of refugees from all around, particularly the pre-mounds folks. So there they are in little villages with dinosaurs attacking them. So now they're moving to the mesa and they're starting a new civilization there.
Thank you.
And that's where we're at now.
Okay, and then
Marky.
Kevin, you wrote the next one
Right.
in chronological time, but not publication.
Right.
Can you tell us about that one?
So that's a pretty clean event. It just takes about a 200-yard by 100-yard parallelogram kind of shape that hits Fort Dix, New Jersey in November of 2008, and happens to take a squad of Army ROTC cadets who are on training maneuvers back to just before the Battle of Trenton. There's a little bit of discovery on the uptime side of what happened, a little bit of intrigue, but that'll hopefully be something that we can cover as we go into potential sequel work as far as what happens uptime versus what's happening with the cadets back in time.
And as you said, you've got a pretty small shard there.
Yeah, that's a shard. That's a small shard.
Okay.
A sliver? It's a sliver?
Yeah, well, when Eric and I talked about it, he wanted to keep it small. He wanted to kind of explore. We've had larger events, but what would happen with a smaller event? Would we be able actually to have the guys in the project track it? What would be the information they would be able to glean from it? So yeah, it was designed to be a small event. But yeah, perfectly clean. Just that much like the Ring of Fire, just that event going to 1776.
And then we've got the Alexander Inheritance, which is primarily written by Eric, Gorg, and Paula. It's a cruise ship in the Caribbean, and I believe they just refer. Well, it drops them in the Med, but their cruise is supposed to be to the Caribbean. And their ship, their tanker, articulated barge tanker, and a little slice of the keg went with them. And they find themselves in the Med in 321 BC, shortly after Alexander the Great has died, and his empire is beginning to be divided up among the successor generals and members of his family, and hijinks ensue. So there are, I believe, about 5,000 people on the cruise ship, and they refer to what happened. I believe it's just the event, and then their downtimers call them the ship people, and they're from all different nationality. Who did you find on a random cruise ship?
Do you remember what year they leave from? Because they are more recent than
Yes.
Grantville folks, so they have some tech that isn't available to Grantville.
Yeah, they're about 20 minutes into the future. They've got the Queen of the Sea has engines that are actually a little bit more advanced than most of what's out there right now, and that they can run on virtually anything. And then the final of the 5 time spot, of the Assiti Shards is an angel called Peterbilt, which is another very small one, grabbing a truck, a pickup, and the 2 families on board them, along with a part of a convenience store, and dropping them in the Cahokia Mountains culture. So, as we go along through these different shards, we get glimpses of the uptime that they've left. Kevin, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So at least in the crossing, once the cadets have disappeared, there's a recruitment effort takes place from the director of the project. I'm sorry, his name is skipping my head right now. I've taught the writing workshop for 4 days. I'm a little bit exhausted, but so he actually goes and approaches the professor of military science, who was essentially the battalion commander for these cadets. And because of his background in mathematics, the director of the project essentially reads him into what's happened and where they believe things have gone. And then he actually, and I apologize because I haven't actually finished reading or I haven't gotten into an angel called Peterbilt, but the original intent with Eric and I was that would be a short story that would follow into the actual book, The Crossing, and that battalion commander would be part of the effort, would actually observe what happens to the event that hits the truck and the convenience store. So the idea was that they were going to start to tie some things in there, and then hopefully be able to start exploring what we're doing uptime to potentially be able to not only track these events better, but even potentially ride them.
Okay. So, can I ask Sarah, if you want to jump in on any of the various shards?
Well, what really fascinated me,
Microphone, please.
what really fascinated me was the person who was so determined to find out what happened to his family that disappeared in one of the shards, that he worked for the better part of 50 years in our timeline in order to create not a shard, but a dot that he could send a message over, and then they expanded it so that he could actually go. And the last I saw, he was stuck there too, but he didn't mind being stuck because he was with his family again. And I thought that was an excellent story.
Bethanne?
I just want to make a comment about the Alexander inheritance, because sometimes when I see it, I find it confusing. The ship is the Queen of the Seas. So when you see a Queen of the Seas book, like on Amazon, that is part of our Assiti Shards Alexander Inheritance series. The Alexander Inheritance and Queen of the Seas are the same thing. I do think that it's interesting seeing how things change and develop from one shard to the other. And it's interesting seeing people adding their own information to grow the shards and which ones they sort of take to more. I've always been surprised we don't have more with Time Spike because dinosaurs. Dinosaurs. Why don't
Dinosaurs, dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs are hard to write.
Oh, they're fun though. Well worth it.
Do you have any thoughts on that you want to add on writing about dinosaurs?
Well, real quickly, I want to go back to this dot idea. I haven't read that yet. Is that in an angel called Peterbilt?
Yes.
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 Okay,
Yeah.
I just started it yesterday and really enjoyed it.
So,
So,
with an angel called Peterbilt, this is, in one sense, the payoff for why we kept telling everybody all along, you're not allowed to set your stories on time.
right. Nice. Okay, I do have a word about dinosaurs if I could jump back in.
Absolutely.
Okay, one of the things that happens in my novels is the people who seem to be adapting the best are the pre-Mounds people, because they've already lived in what I hate to call primitive, but a primitive society where They're living off the land. So it's not as big a jolt for them. And one of them, but they see the dinosaurs and they call them the great demons or the beasts. And there's a scene where a stegosaurus has been killed by a flock of pterodactyls, and he stays with it as it's dying, kind of like Jurassic Park. I hate to say that one scene, but it's dying, and he realizes that it's not a monster, it's an animal. And that really changes his perception and the perception of the rest of the group. The dinosaurs aren't monsters, they're animals. And so what I'm doing, and I try to do, is treat them as such and really think about, okay, what's their habitat, how do they live, what do we know about them, which isn't a lot, because the fossil record is basically a jigsaw puzzle the size of Kansas with a piece every mile or two. There's just more we don't know than we do know. But basically, okay, when riding Time Spike, nobody's gonna ride dinosaurs anytime soon. It's not Dinotopia. And they're very different, and they take some getting used to, and we need, the people need to learn about them more, but they are just animals, they're not monsters. So.
I tend to think of them as really big birds with a really divergent phenotype. They're, you get everything from an ostrich to a rhinoceros, but it's a bird.
Yeah. Well, our birds are descended from them. The other day I saw an ibis out in my yard at the pond, and the way it was stalking and hunting through the reeds, I thought, boy, that's what a predatory dinosaur would look like, just like that movement. Like, that's a dinosaur.
So let's talk about how much information each group brings with them to their new destination. Kevin, you want to start with something?
Sure, so you've got a group of Army ROTC cadets that are actually carrying small little field manuals called a Ranger Handbook with them, which is rife with tactics and things like field hygiene and field sanitation, so things that are going to certainly affect Washington's Army fairly quickly. It's also alluded to and mentioned in the book, they do have a couple of textbooks with them. I say that because I taught Army ROTC and I had cadets that would take textbooks with them to the field so they could study. Haven't fully decided what those textbooks are yet, but given based on a couple of the cadets and their backgrounds, those textbooks will probably come into play with some things that will be very, very impactful to American history.
You send an improvised weapons.
Say again?
You send an improvised weapons.
No, but the whole concept of the dot, I don't want to get into what we're going to talk about with the snurkers, but that's a whole design for things that will be happening later on. And one of the cadets in the crossing had a very, very strong feeling that if they went back to where they came through a year later, that something might happen, and something might happen.
Outstanding.
Wow. I'm looking forward to reading that too.
We all are,
We all are.
Yeah.
including Kevin.
Yeah, I got to get to that point. I got to be able to write it. So,
So,
Well, I think the different groups that go back, in the first place, don't all wind up in the same place, but each one carries a different concentration of information with it. The original Grantville information includes several generations of encyclopedias and people of every age, from World War II vets to very small children. They're all going to have a different amount of knowledge with them and a different perspective on what they should or should not share. The people from the ship are a little more careful about what they share. The people from the truck really don't have a choice, but because they're such a small group. But the things that are in the store and the things that they're able to get to are not the same level of information, but they're a different kind and a different volume than you get in any of the other shards.
I do think it's interesting seeing the varying levels that are taken through. We start with 1632, and it's 2000, so the truth is that in terms of like what we think of as modern electronics aren't really there. They have some computers, they have no smartphones, they have a limited number of cell phones. They just don't have the kind of electronics that we so depend on today. And then the Queen of the Seas ship it's a cruise ship, and it's did you say 20 years after? Something like that. It's enough later that there is an expectation of the people on the ship to be able to go on the internet. So they go out in an open water, so they have a certain amount of data from the internet that they just keep cached and is available even when they go back in time. So they have a big chunk of digital data that's available to them, and they have the physical tech that's on their ship, which is impressive for a ship to me. But they don't have like books that are available, and they don't have the people in it. In Grantville, you have everything across the entire age range, and they have a senior home, they have high schoolers, they have young adults, they have everything. The cruise ship has younger people working on it, and mostly older people as passengers, right? So there's not the full gamut of a normal sort of bell curve of age, right? And you also have the knowledge of the people impacted by that. So you have older people who have knowledge from when they were working, but maybe they had a job 50 years ago. How well do they remember it? And maybe they had a job 50 years ago, and honestly, they're starting to get dementia, so what they remember may not be true. So I think it's interesting to look at in those terms. Then Peterbilt is a very, very, very small number of people, and the crossing is a small number. It's not as small as Peterbilt, and there's very little knowledge outside of what's in their brains in Peterbilt, and the knowledge in the crossing is contained in a few backpacks. So there really is. Oh, and I'm forgetting Time Spike, and Time Spike will have a library, but the library is going to be things that are of interest to inmates primarily, and people from a lot of different cultures who have different types of knowledge. And I will stop and let Garrett, but I think one thing Bjorn should speak to is how the spikes work. You're probably already planning on it, but Garrett. Garrett, did you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, okay. Well, going along the current thread, the Time Spike world does not have a lot from the future. They have the prison, they have weapons, they have a very small library. I was working with, and I have to get back together with, I think it was Alan McDonald from our group, from the bar. He seems to know a lot about prisons and has experience, so I'm going to use him as a resource as to what kind of books would be in that library. Or I could probably find that out on the internet somehow, like we did, like you guys have done with Grantville in Mannington. But no, it's an information poor, so they're really on their own, and they're going to have to learn to adapt. Really, the people who came out the best of it are the Cherokees and the other Native American cultures, because they are already better adapted to a rural, agrarian, hunter lifestyle. So I would foresee that they're going to survive, but it's going to be hard. And one of the things I'm interested in is civilization building. How do these disparate groups eventually get together, and they have to join together to survive? The dinosaurs. So.
And what were you asking about that?
My understanding is there are basically two different mechanisms for how the shards work. One is exemplified by time spike, and the other is more
Okay.
crossing in 1632, if you could explain that.
So 1632, the Ring of Fire just kind of happens. It's sporadic. It's rather large as these things go. And time spike, as I understand it, the shard gets larger as it stutters back through the past. And I would expect that there might have been sort of concentric circles at the beginning of, where your culture landed, but, as soon as they started walking away, that all changed. And then with the Queen of the Sea, it appears to have disappeared in a circle, and then we've got these two smaller pointed vents that are picking up just little stretches.
So more or less the smaller, like 1632 style, they pick up one circle from point A and locate with
Right.
point B, and they just swap back and forth. Time
Presumably.
spike picks up a small section from point A and then switches it with point B, and then a ripple forms around point B,
Mhm.
and group 1 of dirt and circle B of dirt goes back to point C
Yep.
and swaps the outside circle of land is sort of, or possibly all of it. We don't really know because it's back in time.
It's a little
But it-
bit messier than that because they actually, I believe they shot a small dinosaur in Illinois while they were trying to figure out what in the world had
Yes.
happened there.
Yes, they did, and they transported it
Right.
to the
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
investigation.
that's right. So the lands keep kind of going back through time and rippling.
I would like to read the responding officer's report.
I always thought.
I'd like to see him at the bar after he got off work.
I always thought it was.
You'll never believe what I saw.
The original transfer of Grantville to 16, that was the art project that the Assiti were doing, and everything else was just kind of collateral.
The paint spillage.
Yeah,
Wait a minute, it says in the prologue that the Assiti didn't intend to transport Grantville, it was a piece of negligence.
Yeah. But then when they realized that they had done this, they apparently started playing around with whatever they had done and engineered these other shards. So, all right, is there anything on shards that y'all want to make sure we get in?
I have one thought
Okay.
that was from something that Eric said once. He had said that he thought the shards had a certain amount of intelligence and that there was a little bit of mischief involved. They would look at a situation and say, what could we do that would make this interesting? And that's how I got the idea for the Mesa, is they're just playing around. Well, let's put this here and then put a C around it. And it's really a game for them. But I was kind of fascinated by the idea of the shards having some form of intelligence.
I remember.
I have it. I could read it if you want to hear what he said.
Please.
Okay, just a moment. Let's see. Eric on Assiti. We asked him on the bar years ago, and he said, nor have I spent
You're cutting out.
any effort trying to come. Am I?
yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
You know, I could just, I could put this in text and send it to you, Bethanne. Maybe it'd be better if you
You're
read
back
it.
in. Why don't read it now and then copy and send it to me in text if it doesn't work then.
Okay, I'll try that. I spent a systematic overview of their weird art form. But my sense of them is that they are greatly motivated by what you can only call whimsy. And that's reflected in their art. The shards they spin off are one way or another, at least semi-conscious, and also motivated by whimsy, some of which has a malicious edge, but mostly is just a sort of, hey, what the hell, wouldn't this be a nifty twist? So, as a shard approaches impact with the Earth, the guiding quasi-intelligence starts looking for ways to twist the reality of space-time that would, for lack of a better term, have an interesting artistic flavor to it. But it's intrinsically hard to explain any of this in very rational terms because by human standards, the Assiti are pretty insane. So that's what Eric had to say on it.
Thank you. Appreciate your finding of
Thank
that.
you.
Never heard that.
I collected that, boy. I made a copy of that as soon as I saw it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, my burning question is, have we seen all the shards? Are there, you know, I mean, Eric's gone, so who do you ask if you want to write another shard story or create another one? Is that possible, or is this it?
I don't think it's it. I don't think it's it at all.
I have another question. Did they all start at the same time, or is there an interval of between the generation of each shard? There's an interval between where they hit and when they hit. How does that work? Is that because they came at a different speed or from a different time of origin, a different launch moment?
I remember some early things that Eric said about it, and Eric developed the idea as it went. I mean, the whole thing wasn't all there. At first, he said, way early, he was envisioning it sort of like somebody sharpening a pencil with an old-fashioned paring knife, or peeling an apple and leaving bits of the shavings fall more or less at random and uncontrolled. And then as he developed the idea for the other shards landing somewhere, he added to this more direction and personality for each of the shards. So this was a process of development in his own mind as the shard universes grew. But originally it was shavings.
Is that Virginia back there?
That is.
Yeah.
Yep.
I can't see her, but I know the voice.
If I can make one comment, I feel like there were sort of two parts. One is there going to be more shards, and two, who approves. So who would approve new shards is not, ultimately it goes to the family. It's going to be, I think the question in the family isn't necessarily going to approve, but they're going to figure out a mechanism, but that's not today, right? But in terms of writing new stories within shards, first of all, Kevin is a busy man. He's got a 7-second novel to write, and then at some point, to be determined after that, is the crossing would be open potentially. Am I?
Yes. Yeah, that's
Then
the idea.
there's the Queen of the Seas, Alexander Inheritance, which Gorg Huff is the canon person for that. I don't believe Peterbilt is open at this time, but if it were to be, it will probably, we will determine at that time, but they started a series, so.
If you've read Peterbilt, you'll understand why that might not be so open.
Yeah. And then,
There's still some things that we have to figure out from the crossing and Peterbilt because they will affect things going forward.
and then for Time Spike, Garrett is the person who will be overseeing canon. I'm not sure if how fully Garrett is accepting this. Yeah, but he's working on materials.
I referred to myself as your guide in the How to Write for Us thing I just wrote.
I received that this morning.
And then for 1632,
Okay,
of course, we have a
make
bigger
changes.
process.
Thank you.
So my question is, would there ever be an opportunity to have a story of archaeological anomalies that have occurred because of time spikes? So that you've got a situation where something is suddenly completely out of space, out of place. Say an African vegetation discovery in an English or British situation. So they're doing an archaeological exploration and they suddenly find zebra or...
I think that would have to be written from an uptime, in an uptime point of view, pretty much.
I think the controlling factor there is that Eric decided at the beginning that the downtime universes are all alternate universes. They don't affect the uptime that the downtime universe came from.
But I also, my understanding originally, it was there's not going to be stories written in the uptime.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we're seeing a little of it anyway.
although I think Bjorn has something to add.
The team that's been assessing these things has both been getting bigger and acquiring more data. And I can't say one way or the other whether anomalies like that could factor in, but it's a very interesting thought.
It is, and I think the Peterbilt area there and possibly somewhat in the crossing, but I don't know. I don't remember seeing it mentioned there. They are talking about there's all these different events and, you know, the government won't admit it, but there's sort of these tin hat conspiracy people who are being told, no, Grantville didn't go anywhere, everything's perfectly fine. And they're like, yeah, right. And but they're tracking things that are found. So a group like that, I think, might have things where they look and they're like, okay, there's this spot that's been dug out, that's been windblown in the Sahara now. And we can't explain it, but there is the remains of a 17th century German house that was half burnt down, just buried in the sand. And but there's 1700s and we can't explain it. Something like that, right? Or like, I guess actually it would be more like a 1920s, something bombed in World War II, whatever, that shouldn't be there, that's been there, that didn't have people in it, so it didn't trigger anything. But they would be the group that would know about that. And so I don't know, like, it is, as I said, it's interesting, and it might be something that could be mentioned in something like that.
Well, I was always been interested in finding out what because the event itself, the Ring of Fire, is what, 7 miles across? Six miles across. So we know that Grantville and Germany transposed. Okay, in 6.5 miles, there was a village. Guarantee if you've ever been through Germany, they're about 5 miles apart. And so,
in the first
what?
They find it was burnt, it was storage underground.
Okay, there's a couple of things going on here. There are 7 or 8 houses that are burned, and there are dead bodies inside. And I can't remember if they made it as far as these folks didn't actually die in the fires. There were, and some of those may have been houses from the fringe of the village of Schwarzkopf, right at the edge of the Ring of Fire. But if you look at a map now, the village is there. It's called Bad Blankenburg. And this is one of the points where there's a little bit of divergence from the real world. Bad Blankenburg essentially was in the planning process left out and later replaced by the fictional city of Battenberg, which is a few miles to the northwest of Grantville. So you're correct that our maps show there should have been a village right there. It's just one of the oddities of 1632 initially being intended as a one-off novel. Worst one-off novel ever. However,
what have we done?
now let's talk very briefly.
We should call that editorial choice.
Yeah. our full level of down in the weeds nerdiness did not necessarily start on day one with some of these things. Some of it has come in along the way in a corrective fashion. But if we could real quickly go over what's open for writing.
I think Garrett has the most to say,
Yep.
and Kevin probably has the least to say, so why don't we start with Kevin?
So the crossing and the American Revolution, it will be open eventually. A lot will be determined by the sequel and then by the work that we have to do with, again, the things that have happened between Peterbilt and the crossing that affects some of the things that the uptimers are going to try to do, but are not going to necessarily be successful most likely, so we'll see.
Okay, Garrett, let's go. What about stories set in Time Spike?
Time Spike is open for business.
Excellent.
We are encouraged. I'd like to encourage everybody to write a Time Spike story. Today I finished up a pretty long introduction to how to do it. The author, what do I call it? Author's guide. I don't know, it might be too long. But basically, the same rules apply that apply to writing for a Grantville story. And put your story in slush. We have a grid that we're working on that we will complete very soon, and you can choose your characters. It's a lot looser than the Grantville grid. The Grantville grid lists every single person who was in the area and has their history already placed, and you have to claim a character. It's not so stringent in Time Spike. There were thousands of pre-announced people and hundreds of guards. So you basically would just need to make something reasonable. As I like to say, the same rule applies for Grantville: no vampires or ninjas. Has to be something realistic. And come tell a story. It's just a really big world to explore. We've only seen parts of it. And there's a lot of different types of people there. So there's a lot of different, multicultural dynamics that could happen. We've already had one war, that was me. And yeah, come check it out. Come write for us.
And if I might mention one thing, he mentioned that he wrote about a war. We don't have dates, but his Time Spike books will be released again by Bain as ebooks sometime coming.
Soon.
Sometime.
It's not going to be in the next few months, but it will be.
Soon.
It's on their list.
You're not required to read those, although if you really want to get in, we are a shared universe. So I would recommend reading all of Dave Dove's stories, all of my stuff, so you really know what's going on. And we want to build it into something bigger the way Grantville is.
So is this got a separate slush pile, or is it going to go in with the 1632 slush?
Same slush pile.
Same slush pile?
Throw a TS or Time Spike at the front of your title if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yes, please, do that.
And it will go in the same magazine if it's accepted as a short story.
Although we literally have a many halves situation with Time Spike, please don't make us write the many halves of Alexander Correctional or whatever by inserting, all sorts of exceptional people. These are mostly regular people.
Except criminals.
But since we know that our writers very much like to pick up younger male characters with no immediate family in the area, that's actually right there waiting for you in this particular shard. So we will not quibble about that part. I'll go.
Yeah, what I find is, go ahead. Sorry, Bjorn. Regular people, when put into extraordinary circumstances, will often rise to extraordinary.
Although I will add a little qualifier quick, if you don't mind. If you're looking for an uptimer who's female, Please run that by first, because it's I believe the prison population is predominantly male, so there's not going to be very many female uptimers. So for the uptimers,
Oh, was that Garrett?
I do plan to be a little bit stringent about that. If you want to get one of the nurses or the guards, we should talk about it first. And we're real open-minded, but we do need to keep track of the grid. It's important to us because only a limited amount of people came through the event, through the quiver. So we do need to stick to those lists.
Okay, I'll address the Alexander inheritance real quickly. Cruise ship, 5,000-ish people. We can check with Gorg on the proportion of passengers versus crew. That's a known thing. We can probably find that right on, many cruise ship sites. And this is a diverse group of people from many nationalities. And if you've been on a cruise ship before, different jobs tend to be open to different kinds of people. The captain is Norwegian. The stewards tend to be from certain places. Deckhands tend to be from certain places. But there are folks from all over. It's just skewed older. There are some kids on board, but like the teens, that's a scarcer group. But there's more people on the Queen of the Sea than there were in Grantville, right? So you've got plenty of room to play around.
I never thought of that. Yeah, there are.
Virginia?
One thing I would say from quite a bit of going on cruises experience, you can play with large numbers of Filipinos. You cannot believe how many Filipinos staff cruise ships. It's one of their major sources of outside income. They put the young people out on the ships to send money home to the family. So on a ship that size, you are going to have really a goodly mass of Filipino staff, and they will be in your preferred age range, most of them, from late teens to early 30s before they go home and settle down.
The other thing the Queen would have is a higher level of technology for medicals, for experimentation, because one, it's set in the future, and two, it had to be an enclosed place.
Yes.
We see this now when cruise ships develop an illness that they need to quarantine. They can keep people on board because they've got facilities.
Right. I mentioned that the engines are slightly more advanced than what's out there now. Their personal cell phones with those translator apps seem to be better than what I've got. I'm not sure how much better, but I can't pull off some of the stuff.
Pretty better.
Star Trekky.
So,
I didn't say it. I want to do.
so one of the common cruise languages then is going to be Tagalog, right?
Yes.
Or I'm probably mispronouncing that.
Tagalog.
Tagalog,
Yes.
because there's a fair proportion of Filipinos on the ship.
Yes, absolutely. And you may also notice that while the shards are separate, the homework was not. And Trinidad appears in more than one shard, and the Cahokia culture appears in more than one shard. So if you have gotten yourself all set to write one of them, and you may have looked into, Trinidad, and checked out whether you could put something there in 1632, you may also find out that that's a great place for your characters to be in the Alexander inheritance. So you can capitalize on that part of it as well.
Yes, so we're pretty much at time to change over.
So, okay, final thoughts real quick.
stay tuned, it's gonna be fun.
It is going to continue to grow and be fun, and if you want to be a part of it, tell a story you want to hear or read. You might be surprised at how quickly that story becomes part of the universe.
If you want to write or know someone who wants to write, Alexander Inheritance and Time Spike are both open. They're fun, same kind of rules, same kind of help, but a whole lot less in canon.
Yes, yes. A little easier way to get in, maybe.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, everyone.
We can go back to sleep now.
Thank you.